Hi, my name is Van. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ELSA. ELSA started in 2016, and we right now have about 30 million users globally. The key markets that we have are in Southeast Asia, in Japan, India, Latin America, and we currently have a growing user base in Europe as well. So when we launched ELSA in Vietnam in 2016, we chose Vietnam first as our first home market because I'm from Vietnam and we know the market best. And once we get really good traction and growth in Vietnam, the next question for us is where to launch next. And Japan was the second country that we chose to launch internationally outside of Vietnam. The way how we chose Japan as a second market for us to launch internationally was two things that we took a look at. First of all, is a top-down effort, and what we usually do is we look into the total market size and which market has a very high willingness to pay for the English learning solution and which market has a high need and demand for English learning as well. So that's a macro view, and then we also do the micro view, which is a bottom-up approach. We look into our current user base. So even though we launched a product in Vietnam, we of course have some users in different countries, and so we look into which country had a very high performance in terms of the user behaviors with our product, whether that's a stickiness, whether that's the product engagement, whether that's the conversion. And so that's the two ways that we looked. And then Japan come on top. Very big willingness to pay there. People really need the English learning solution, and we had really high conversion rate, really high stickiness from the Japan users that we currently have. Even though they are very small, they indicate a really good product market fit. Stickiness in a product for us is, first of all, is the level of engagement, whether the users downloading the app, how long do they stay around for, and how much time do they usually spend in practicing the app. But it's also measured through the virality. So once they use the product, are they sticking around and telling their friends and their families about the impact of the product on their own, and whether we can measure that virality or not, which is that organic growth that we're usually aiming for before we deciding that, hey, the product should be able to grow on its own before we started doing investment and marketing and all of the other efforts for the company. So for us, when we choose another market to expand to, there are other elements for us, right? Once we see that there's initial potential product market fit, meaning that your users actually love your product, that is on the consumer side. Then we started deciding, hey, time for us to add in more marketing efforts, performance marketing, paid marketing, and then do advertising. We also rely on influencer marketing at the beginning because these influencers will have a lot of reach in the market, and then they can start telling the user base, and then they will be able to join us, and then the virality will start happening. We as a company also have a B2B solution, and this is very important for us as we think about expanding internationally is, do we know how to reach these companies on the ground? Do we have the people that have the local network? Do we know how to identify the right partners? But also, do we have an understanding of how long the sales cycle is and what does it take for us to close that contract? Is there any other potential legal issues or challenges that we have to know? Some countries require you to open an entity locally, and that's going to take a lot longer time for you to close the sales cycle. So there are multiple elements for us in order to look into the B2B process as well, and then we can decide that, hey, that could potentially be a market that we can start hiring sales rep on the ground so that we can start expanding our sales force the moment that we see some good traction. I think when companies want to expand your product internationally outside of your home market that you already have success for, I think a couple of things that you would probably want to look at, right? First of all is, again, do you have the right support network for you in order for you to expand to that local market? Because you might have a lot of connection and you know who is who in your home country, but outside of that, do you have the right support? And whether that's your mentor, whether that's a network that you're a part of, whether that reaching back to your investor. So I think that's the very important thing. Second is, you know when to hire a local person and how to hire that local person, because that will be a crucial element of success. In the case of ELSA, what we did was that we decided to hire a more junior growth manager instead of hiring a country manager at the beginning, because we learned through the process that hiring a country manager at the beginning is extremely challenging on its own. A country manager has to be an entrepreneur kind of person, want to start the operations of a country from the ground up, but that takes time to convincing that person that they should join us. Versus hiring a growth manager, they can get the momentum going. There's a lot of work that we have to get going at the beginning. In a new country, a growth manager to be put underground, they usually are responsible for all of the growth initiative and tactics when you first launch into a new market. So as a CEO, when I hire a growth manager, I had to give them specific tasks, what to do, what not to do, and how to track the growth. But if I start hiring a country manager, basically I will leave it up to the country manager. I'll just have like, hey, here's your P&L, here's your target, and then we'll leave it up to the country manager to manage your own budget and decide where to invest that money in. So they're basically a CEO of that country, right? So that's a much bigger scope versus a growth manager on the ground. In product growth, we usually measure virality, and there's a K factor, which is basically measuring for one user that you bring in, how many more users that users will be able to bring in for you without you paying for the marketing dollars. So if I pay $10 to bring in one user and that users bring another user, now my cost of acquiring that user become 5 instead of 10 because my product has some virality. When you bring in one user and they don't bring in any more user at all, then you won't be able to grow organically. So that K factor is a way to measure that virality. So when you have a good K factor, usually higher than 1, it means that, hey, your product is viral enough. That also means that, hey, you can start pumping in the dollars because $1 you bring in is going to bring in an extra user as well. So you're going to start making money out of it. When you started investing marketing dollars too early and the product doesn't have that virality yet, it's really expensive to acquire a new user, and that user would just be one, but they won't bring another user, right? So virality being measured through K factor is really important. So that's first of all. And then second is you have to start pumping just a little bit money and start testing your ROI, which is usually we measure to LTV CAC. LTV and CAC is a very important KPI when we think about performance marketing. LTV is the lifetime value of that user over the life of the product, and the higher the LTV, of course, the better. And then CAC is the cost of acquiring a user, and that LTV CAC ratio, usually when you get about 2x, that's like 2 to 3x, that's a golden number. And the higher the LTV, the lower the CAC, then the better the ratio for you. So we usually measure that LTV CAC ratio and make sure that you are in the right range before you start pumping more money in. CAC is very different market to market because the performance marketing cost is very different. So even though you might have succeeded in one market with your LTV CAC, when you pump in the marketing dollars, the next market you have to test in a very small scale. Only when you started seeing the virality is good, the LTV CAC ratio is really healthy, your unit economic is good, that's when you say, hey, now I can start scaling up. And then that's when you pump more money in, and that's when you start hiring more people to do performance marketing. The decision to when to do performance marketing in-house or through an agency is really varied on the market as well. Some market is much better to do at the global level because you can just optimize, right? Like you let the algorithm figure it out whether that's profitable for you or not. But some markets you have to do like localized ad creatives and ad set, and hiring a local agency who understand what kind of creatives that will be attractive to the local users so that they can lead to higher click rate is much more important. And so for us, we do a very model of like agency versus in-house as well. It really depends on the market that you are in, and I don't think there's the right answer there to figure out the one-size-fits-all model for a global market. First of all, I think you make sure that you have a really strong product market fit at home and you know what success looks like for you before you decide that it's time for you to expand globally. I think second is you have to make sure that it's a market that you know confidently enough that you have a way to win, whether through your personal network, through the network of your investor, the network of your mentors, but you have to be able to figure it out whether you have a strong support from that network in order for you to go into a new market. I think third of all is you have to understand what does that take to win that market, whether the sales cycle is long enough, is long for you, whether you have any legal challenges, whether all of that expansion will break your current business model and you have to change everything to do it again, versus you have to utilize 90-95% of what you have and just a little bit more localization. I think if you can get that balance, meaning that you can just take what you currently have and that playbook and apply to the next country with very little changes in your product and your operations, then I think you are ready to expand to a new market.